We got a big, mobile, responsible, and smart right-handed defenseman to break down for you on today's episode. The prospect spotlight is on Dominik Badinka for today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be breaking down the game of Dominik Badinka, big right-handed defenseman who's been playing in the SHL lately, not getting enough love for each of our likings. We'll get into his profile, the way he plays, the puck skills as well in our first segment. Talk more in detail about the toolkit, the habits, the overall details of Badinka's game in our second segment. And then in our third, we'll talk about the NHL projection, the upside with Badinka, and which team would be the best fit for him. Before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. We're so close to 1,000. It'd be great to help us hit that. And make sure to leave us a comment letting us know what you think of the episode and who you want us to cover next. And if you have any questions, leave them down below as well. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, though, whether that's Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you're listening to this, make sure to make us your first listen of the day and leave us a rating review. So let's get right into it here with Dominik Badinka. Give me the profile on him because you've been kind of championing him. I was hesitant at the beginning of the season, but the more I watched him, the more I liked him, the more I agreed with you. So give me the jump on Dominik Badinka here and what kind of game he plays overall.
Yeah, for sure. So Dominik Badinka is a 6'3", 183-pound right shot defenseman, quite old for this draft class. He's a late November 05 birthday, and he's played almost this entire season with the Malmö Redhawks in the SHL. He only played 17 games in J20, where he's logged 2 goals and 13 assists. And in 33 SHL games, he has a single goal and 4 points. So not the biggest offensive force, especially at the SHL level, but a really, really solid defensive player. And especially the intelligence and the breakout passing ability have shown consistently against professional competition under pressure. And he really does project as like a modern, like physical defense first defenseman, because he also does have that breakout ability, and he's a pretty solid distributor in the offensive zone. He moves well off the puck. He's not going to wow you with any dangles. Like, the handling skills a bit of a limiting factor, as we'll check out in this segment, but very projectable and very NHL styled, and definitely a profile that GMs and NHL scouts typically adore.
Yeah, for sure. I really like the profile with Badinka. He's a player that usually gets picked a lot higher than his predicted rank, and it's because it's a rare commodity to have a player this mobile, this composed, and this big. That's a right-handed defenseman. We all know the premium that's on right-handed defenseman, but especially this style is one that's highly requested among NHL draft teams. But yeah, I really like the puck skills overall. I don't think there's anything that'll wow you on that end, but it's enough to get the puck up the ice and to help him make plays, right?
For sure, and especially because he is so composed under pressure, and he is such a skilled passer. He always keeps a solid, easy, simple pass in his back pocket when he is pressured, but constantly scanning the ice for higher value passes. He likes to go for stretch passes and passing through the neutral zone, really trying to spark quick counterattacks, and the passing skill and the passing mechanics really do enable that. But he's been able to develop a really good like set of tools to compensate for subpar handling. Like, I think the handling grade specifically might be a 3.5, maybe 4 grade if you stretch it by our grading tool by with Dobber Prospects, but it's the passing game, it's the intelligence, it's the composure under pressure that really opens up the ice, and it also allows him to kind of fearlessly be able to attack the middle and take on opponents rather than trying to solve those things with the situations with a flashy dangle. He likes to draw in pressure and then pass through it or around it, and very intelligent in that facet in terms of also being able to create space for his teammates to then exploit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the main standout for me is, the passing ability. We've talked about the handling already. It's kind of a subpar tool, but I really like the variety in his passing and also the intelligence that he shows. You mentioned the stretch passing. I think that's a big element of his game that really stands out for me. He's a player that is comfortable, skating the puck out, but when he has a player who's in a better situation than him, he'll hit him with a hard, really accurate stretch pass right on the stick, which helps kind of there are players that you pass on the breakout and you're never confident that it's going to land on a stick. I think it's the opposite for Badinka. He's a player who you very rarely see him cause icings. And even though the ice time is dipped, I think it's a big part of why he was getting so much SHL ice time at the start of the season. And what makes it such a big part of his effectiveness against pros is that he's a player that connects really well. He connects plays and he creates offensive zone rushes without necessarily getting involved in them himself, but just by just bombing a puck up to the right option at the right time with the right power on his passes. I think that's a big element of his game. How do you rate the shot though?
Yeah, a little bit subpar. Like among the puck skills, it's really the passing game specifically that stands out. I think there's a little bit of room to grow as a playmaker as well in the offensive zone.
Mhm.
There have been flashes of creativity and his ability to use his frame and his physicality to protect possession and draw in that pressure, and then sometimes even like flash a hook pass around pressure when he does attract it is quite enticing. But
Mhm.
with the shooting, like it's not very strong. I think that mechanically he's about average and he doesn't exactly like get into like the high mid slot as a shooting threat to get closer in, but his shot selection isn't poor, and I think that'd be
Yeah.
one thing that is a bonus and why it might be like a 4.5 grade rather than like a 3.5 grade with the shot specifically, is that he rarely gifts away possession through shooting, and when he does take shots from the blue line, they're pretty well timed. There's always a reason for it. There might be
Yeah.
a lack of execution at times, but the ideas behind the shooting is always quite sound. So I think there's a bit of room to grow there. Obviously, like he's also quite strong, quite big. At least in terms of the shot power, I think there's a decent amount of growing room for him, and he's never going to be a shooting threat on a power play or anything. But I think that especially in terms of just being like the typical shooting threat in terms of a defenseman that's like jumping in on the rush. There's enough room
Yeah.
to grow there to be like around NHL average, but not that much beyond that.
Yeah, for sure. And last but not least, another of his raw tools, I think, is the skating is really a standout, right? I mean, he's a player who,
Hugely.
I mean, he carries the puck extremely well, but he carries it through his skating rather than his hands. But what really stands out is on the defensive side. The defensive skating for me is among the best in this draft, right?
It really is, and I think the gap control specifically, which we'll look into the next segment, still has a little bit of room to grow. It's been one element that has been a bit more inconsistent in my viewings, but when he keeps a tight gap, his ability to match the footwork of attackers is excellent.
Yeah.
There's still a little bit of variability in just how aggressively he keeps his gaps tight, but his actual like ability to maintain a close gap is one of the better ones among the European defensemen, at least in this draft class, and his ability to also he's a real rover in the defensive zone as well. He's able to close those gaps really quickly when he decides to. His ability to get behind the net and combine the physicality and the mobility to box out players, which we're seeing a little bit more in terms of his net front ability as well as the season's progressed, is also
Yeah.
a real strength. And like his skating ability is really a glue for a lot of his game on both sides of the puck. It enables his
Mhm.
style of play, and when paired with like the composure, I think it really helps make him very projectable stylistically. And I don't think there's a very high likelihood of him missing out on the NHL completely. I think like he
Yeah.
might top out as a bottom pairing guy if his development doesn't go as well as I think it can. But the combination of intelligence, physicality, and mobility is one that very rarely misses in terms of right shot defensemen specifically.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into the more mental stuff, the habits, the toolkit, the decision making, all that good stuff in our second segment. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors over at Game Time. If you're looking for cheap tickets to any event, Game Time is the best place to get them done. They're especially the best place to get last minute tickets. I have a schedule that changes around a lot, and Game Time really comes in clutch when I end up with an afternoon free and I want to go to an event. It's really the best place to get tickets last minute. They've got a bunch of deals to help you save money as well. My favorite is zone deals. With zone deals, you pick the section, Game Time picks a seat, and that gives you an average of about 18% of savings. And the Game Time guarantee makes sure that you always get the best price. If you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what Game Time has to offer, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And Game Time isn't just for sports. They're good for any event that requires tickets, whether that's comedy, theater, any sporting event you want. Game Time has you covered. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, really simple. You just download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk more about the decisions, the habits, and the toolkit with Dominik Badinka. I think this is a definite better element of his game than the
Oh, yeah.
raw skill, the raw tools. Talk me through the kind of decisional elements of Badinka that make his game tick at the SHL level.
I think it all starts with the scanning habits. Like they're well above average. They're really quite strong, and his risk assessment gauge is already quite well attuned. Far more so than like the average 18-year-old playing SHL minutes. He likes to push his limits a little bit, but he really knows when when it's a little bit too much. And I think that, especially with like the defensive habits, there's a really quick learning curve with Badinka. When he makes a mistake, he quite quickly adapts and integrates the lesson that he learned from that into his next shift. And
Yeah.
that quick ability to learn and to adapt is, I think, a very big reason why he's been getting quite big minutes this season. And as you mentioned in the first segment, like he was playing like 20 minutes a night in the middle portion of the season for quite a few games. But in the last like month and a half, while Malmö has been really doggedly trying to avoid the relegation battle, which they've succeeded to do just barely, like they're one spot above the relegation battle, but they succeeded. But that also limited the amount of ice time that they were giving to their younger players, including Badinka. So he's been playing more like 8 to 10 minutes recently. But yeah, like he's really quite intelligent, very composed, and that really does bleed into a lot of his other habits on both sides of the puck too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the main standout for me. But we can also talk about the toolkit, the way his tools interact. I don't think his handling interacts particularly well with his skating. I think he's at his best
No,
when he's underhandling the puck, moving pucks early, and kind of using his skating to position himself off the puck. But yeah, when it comes to moving at high speeds and handling the puck at high speeds, that is an area that I've often seen as being a kind of an issue with Dominik Badinka, right?
for sure. He has a really locked top hand. He's quite rigid as a puck handler. He struggles, especially when he has to handle the puck closer to his body. Gets really awkward in those situations. But his strength is not getting himself in those situations very often, and
Yeah.
he really is like a pass first player. And he's been like really like adding some more versatility to his passing arsenal as the season's progressed, like I mentioned earlier, like with the integration of some more hook passes, getting around pressure, drawing it in. And his high level of composure allows him to do that despite lacking the big safety net that handling would be in those
Yeah.
situations. And obviously he's going to have to work on the handling a little bit before he hits the NHL level, but his ability to adapt despite that weakness has made me quite optimistic in how he's going to project in the NHL as a subpar puck handler.
Yeah, for sure. That's the interesting thing is, how does a player take a weakness and kind of either overcome it or turn it into a strength through repetitions. I think that although Badinka's adapting really well to his lack of handling ability, the way he's adapting is removing opportunities to kind of explore his stick handling ability
For
even
sure.
further and turn it into a potential strength. But I think you have to work on the foundation of it, which is kind of unlocking that top hand, increasing the range of motion and the puck catching ability in order to then kind of hit reps. Because if you're hitting reps with no foundation, you have nothing to work on. You have nothing to build on, right? So that's the main thing with Badinka. But I'd like to see him once he's kind of established a foundation of handling skill, a foundation of range of motion, and the ability to catch a puck in motion and all that stuff. Once he's developed that foundation, I wouldn't like to see him continue to circumvent the issue, or kind of tap dance around the conversation, if you will. Like, I want him to be able to get to the crux of it, which is getting more daring, getting more involved with your stick handling ability, learning to play off the backhand. That's the things I would like to see out of Badinka, kind of progressively, as he kind of developed this foundation of skill. But another part of his toolkit, in terms of how his tools interact, is something you mentioned before with the gap closing ability, the gap control. I think it's more of a mental element than a physical one, because physically, Badinka's skating is excellent in terms of the pivots, the range of motion.
Yeah.
The outside edge utilization. What is it about the mental aspect of gap control that kind of falters with Badinka?
I think a lot has to do with playing in the SHL. He doesn't want to make the mistake of being overly aggressive and pinching too early and being
Yeah.
beaten at his own blue line, forcing an odd man rush. Uh, I'm sure a lot of that also comes from the coaching too, of wanting to mitigate the risk of having an 18-year-old playing like second pairing minutes for a decent stretch of the season in the SHL, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how much of that is system related and how much of that is him himself. I want to dig in a little bit more into his junior tape to see a bit more on that front. But yeah, like his ability to combine a really strong sense of timing with like the skating ability and the physicality means that when he's confident in his gap closing ability, he is one of the better ones in this draft class. And like the
Yeah.
consistency is a bit more of the factor there. But I'm not too concerned of how that's going to develop with time. I've seen enough games where he's been really consistent in that facet to merit optimism with it. But yeah, like I think that like with the defensive side of things specifically, he really has a lot of the foundational elements that you look for in the modern NHL. Like he's really strong at boxing players out, at he consistently gains inside positioning. He's really good at planting his feet and not being pushed off from where he plants himself, and making sure that his goalie has a pretty clear vision of where the puck is. Again, his scanning habits are very strong. So he has a constant mental map of where opponents are, where his teammates are, and that helps him a ton on both sides of the puck too. So a lot of the habits allow him to adapt to perhaps subpar puck skills apart from the passing ability, and still be a really, really effective player and pretty consistently be able to tilt the ice in his own favor, in his team's favor.
Yeah, for sure. And in preparation for some scouting work I was doing over on my YouTube channel, I watched a game before and after his being sent down to the J20 recently. And then, I went with one of the games where he was playing kind of 15 to 18 minutes, and then went to a game where he played 8 minutes right after he was called up, right? And what really impressed me was the resiliency. He didn't often, when a player's put in that situation, you'll either see them up the ante and get hyper aggressive and try to impress and try to do too much, or you'll see them kind of mute their game a bit and kind of seem a bit shy. I didn't feel any difference between Badinka pre-call up, pre-send down and post-send down. I was watching the exact same player, just with less ice time, which is really good to see, because you want a player who's able to develop an identity, to develop a game that's really proper and consistent and strong. That's definitely Badinka, especially defensively. He has a foundation of resiliency mentally that really helps him in situations where, for example, he makes a mistake, lets in a goal on his next shift. He's not, he's not over, he's not like too shy. He's not, staying in the high slot and like waiting for things to happen. He's comfortable kind of surfing checks, directing players towards the boards. But I think getting more confident in being aggressive is another thing. Like, that's a separate thing from just being confident overall. Because aggression involves an extra step. It involves you stepping up on a player, and it involves a really good risk assessment. I think Badinka is still working on that risk assessment. I think he's still working on his ability to trust the fact that he has a mobility, that he has a movement to be able to kind of close those gaps again once he creates them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see him develop moving forward. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll get into our third, where we talk about the NHL projection, the overall upside with Badinka, and which team would be the best fit for him, after these messages from our sponsors at eBay Motors.
Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and far more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, which is available to US customers only, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
Alrighty, so closing things off with our final segment, we'll be talking about the NHL projection, the NHL fit for Dominik Badinka, which team should be drafting him and could be a great fit for him, and also the upside. How many points is he going to score in the NHL? That kind of stuff. We've already established that Badinka is a really safe projection to the NHL. There aren't a lot of scenarios where he doesn't make the NHL. But what is the projection for you, the realistic projection for Badinka in terms of, where he ends up in an NHL lineup? Are we talking about a second pair right-handed defenseman who plays on the top penalty kill, second penalty killing unit? Kind of what do you see as a realistic projection for Badinka moving forward?
Yeah, I think if I'm playing the odds, my guess would be that he's a really reliable number 4 at the end of the day. I think that there's definitely upside as a number 3. I don't really see much top pairing upside with Badinka, at least as he's currently like constituted with his profile. But I think that there's definitely a possibility that he only ends up as like a third pairing guy, but like I don't really think he's going to be a number 6 either. I think he's a pretty solid bet to fall anywhere between number 3 and number 5, which I think is really high value, especially if he's dropping into the second round. But yeah, like I think with a point projection specifically, that's going to be a bit more limited. Like he might top out as like a 30-point guy, but his value is really going to come in the breakout game, in the in zone defending, in the transition defending, and just being a real like play suffocator in his own zone, and the ability to like combine the mobility, the intelligence, and the physicality into one really cohesive defensive profile, I think gives him a pretty solid shot at being that second pairing presence at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. And we were talking, you mentioned the value of where you would pick a number 3 to number 5 projected NHL defenseman. I'm thinking, we've seen players like this get picked in the top 10, top 15, top 20. He's at 42nd right now on Bob McKenzie's board. I think any team should, like yesterday, would trade a mid-second round pick for a number 3 to number 5 defenseman, right? So it's like it's really interesting values, especially in those later rounds, especially in situations where he's starting to slip in the rankings. But I don't think realistically that's going to happen. Even though I respect Bob McKenzie's work and I'm sure he's really well connected with teams. I think that by the time his final rankings come out, either Dominik Badinka's in the top 25 or he's going to be surprisingly. He's going to be pleasantly surprised. Like I think that Badinka just screams NHL pick. Like NHL teams, especially contenders, are always looking for this profile of guy, right?
They always are, and again, it only ever takes one team to upset like predicted draft rankings, right? So I definitely think that you're going to see a team that values this profile, which is most NHL teams, take that swing in the late first round, especially if it's a contending team. Like, for instance, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think would love him. I think that like the scouting department would be a really big fan, like perhaps a bit more progressive than the management group is at the moment. But Badinka would be a profile player that I think could really appease both factions within that organization, like the leftover from the Kyle Dubas days, as well as the new Brad Treliving management group. I think that Badinka has that combination of like modern style of play, strong breakout game, but also that like grit, physicality, defensive skill, like the high end mobility, and just the level of composure. So I really would be shocked if you see like a contender in the late first take that swing. But if he falls to the second round, I think that you have a really high upside swing there. But like also like the Vegas Golden Knights, I could see making that swing.
My goodness.
For instance, like
such a Vegas pick.
Because he's so tradable. Like he's the most tradable.
He's absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they ended up with David Estrom. They ended up with Tom Schertl out of David Estrom. I just
Yeah.
wonder what they could get out of Badinka. A lot of teams want this guy, especially contenders. But that brings me to my potential NHL fit. And if Nikita Artemonov is gone by the time the Carolina Hurricanes pick, I could very, very well see them go for this guy. He fits the mold of defenseman that they're looking for. Some of their guys are getting a bit older. So I think there's an opportunity for them to add a player who's going to be kind of joining the team at just the right time in order to hit a stride in the top six, and then potentially work his way up to a top four role, kind of like we saw with Brady Shane and Brett Pesce, and those guys. They weren't plug and play top four defensemen. They started off lower, earned their way
Yeah.
up, and I think that Badinka could become that. Like, I think that's, and again, this is exactly the type of defenseman that Carolina is all over usually. So again, if Nikita Artemonov, who is the most Carolina Hurricanes pick of this 2024 draft, is gone by the time that they're picking, I think they run to the stage for Badinka in that late first, especially if they're making the finals, especially if they're winning the cup. They're going to be setting themselves up for long-term future, and they'll want to add players that currently work for them as futures. And I think that that's exactly what Badinka is. But early second, let's say he slips to a rebuilding team, for example. Which of the rebuilding teams right now do you think is more likely to take a swing on Badinka?
I think the Chicago Blackhawks will be really interested. I think that there's a bit of a lack of reliable defensemen in their prospect pool. Like Kevin Korchinski's had a little bit of a difficult rookie season. Obviously a left
Yeah.
shot, but on the right you have guys like Sam Renzel that are a bit like boomer bust. And
Mhm.
Badinka would be a real stabilizing force to kind of add into that fray, especially if they spend their first round draft pick on a non-right shot defenseman. If they go lefty or forward, like if they go for like Ivan Demidov or something like that in the first round, I think that picking a player like Dominik Badinka could kind of like offset that and getting a high likelihood NHLer, but also some decent second pairing upside to boot. But beyond that, maybe the Montreal Canadiens, like the team that swung on David Reinbacher, who is my stylistic comp for Dominik Badinka in terms of how he approaches the game, and obviously a bit of a
Yeah.
difference there in just how refined they are. Like Badinka is a bit more neurotic than
Mhm.
Reinbacher was in his draft year, but I could see the Habs be really interested if he's still on the board, and they always love drafting out of Sweden, and they really trust their Swedish scout Krista Rockstrom. So I could see
Yeah.
that as a fit as well.
Yeah, for sure. And last but not least, let's talk about the upside. In terms of points, what do you see as a realistic projection, and what do you see as the best of the best scenario for Badinka at the NHL level?
Yeah, like I said, I think that like 30 points is kind of like the realistic upside. If he really stretches it and like if he's somehow if he's able to develop his playmaking game from his passing tools to really be a more effective playmaker in the offensive zone and unlock second power play upside, which I think has about like a 5 to 10% chance of happening,
Yeah.
then maybe you get into that 40-point talk. But I don't think that point production is going to be the glaring strength with Badinka at the NHL
Yeah.
level.
I think the upside rests really in where he ends up on the penalty kill, because he has the upside, the potential, the mobility, the gap
Yes.
closing ability when he's on, the stick work, the physicality to play a top penalty killing role, and beyond the ice when you've got you've got a defensive zone face off in the last minute with a lead to keep. That's the type of player you want out there. So I think that's really where the upside lies with Badinka. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day for listening on your favorite podcasting platform, wherever that is: Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating review as well. Helps us out a lot. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next shows of the month of March as we continue our prospect coverage. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.